Creatine has 7.9 billion views on TikTok. Not million, billion with a B. And here's the weird part. The reason it blew up isn't the reason you'd think. It's not gym bros benching, it's not the bodybuilders. The viral angle that took creatine from a dusty supplement shelf to a 4.2 projected market by 2030 is this. It cleared my brain fog. Suddenly, creatine is a nootropic, a cognitive enhancer, a women's wellness staple. Kourtney Kardashian is selling creatine gummies. Bloom Nutrition made over $1 million over TikTok Shop selling creatine gummies. Andrew Huberman mentions it on his podcast to 10 million viewers. Demand spikes overnight. And here's the thing. Some of that is actually real. Creatine is one of the most studied supplements on the planet. Over 1,000 clinical trials. But the marketing has lapped the science by about 4 meters. Brain fog gone in 24 hours. Premium forms that absorb better. Gummy formats that taste like a treat. One major creatine gummy brand, Push, recently got recalled because independent Eurofins lab testing found it contained 0.1 grams of creatine per serving. The label said 5 grams. That's 2% of the advertised dose. You'd need to eat roughly 50 servings to get what one serving promised. And that's just the start. I am Mariana Kanevetskia, a biomedical scientist and chemist. This show is where we separate what's proven from what's just business and pretty marketing. For science sake, let's get into it. So what is creatine and how does it work? Okay, so before we talk about what's trending, we need to understand the basics. Because if you don't understand the mechanism, every marketing claim sounds equally plausible. And that's how companies sell you overpriced nonsense. So, creatine. Your body already makes it. Your kidneys start the process by using 2 amino acids, arginine and glycine, and your liver finishes the job by adding a methyl group. Between those 2 organs, you produce roughly 1 to 3 grams of creatine every single day. You also get it from food, meat, fish, poultry. An average omnivore diet adds about 1 gram per day. Herring is the richest source, about 1 gram per 100 grams of raw fish. Beefsteak and salmon sit around 0.5 grams per 100 grams. So between what your body makes and what you eat, most people get between 2 to 4 grams of creatine per day. And you need it because every day your body degrades around 1.5 to 2 grams of creatine into creatinine, which is basically waste that your kidneys flush out. It's a constant cycle. Make it, use it, lose it, replace it. Now, all of that creatine has to live somewhere. And where it lives tells you a lot about what it does. A 70-kilo adult carries a creatine pool of about 120 grams. 95% of that, about 114 grams, is stored in your skeletal muscles. The remaining 5% is scattered across your brain, heart, and kidneys. And if you're thinking about supplementation, you have to know this detail. Your muscles have a ceiling. The maximum they can hold is about 160 grams. Most meat eaters sit at around 75 to 86% of that ceiling. Vegetarians and vegans, closer to 63 to 71%. Because creatine only exists in animal muscle tissue. Plants have 0. Not trace amounts, genuinely 0. This is why vegetarians have about 10 to 12% less creatine in their muscles and 30 to 50% less in their blood compared to omnivores. They're relying entirely on the endogenous synthesis, what their body makes, with no dietary top-up. And women? Women synthesize about 70 to 80% of what men produce, partly due to hormonal differences affecting the rate-limiting enzyme. So if you're a woman on a plant-based diet, you're starting from the lowest possible baseline. Keep that in mind. This is going to matter. Now, creatine's job is deceptively simple. So what is all that creatine doing in your muscles? Recycling energy, specifically ATP or adenosine triphosphate. Think of ATP as a fully charged battery. Every time your cells need to do something that requires effort, contract a muscle, fire a neuron, repair a tissue, they drain that battery. ATP gets used up fast. Now, your body has several systems for recharging those batteries. The fastest one, phosphocreatine system. Creatine sits in your muscles already bonded to a phosphate group. That's phosphocreatine. And when ATP runs out, phosphocreatine donates its phosphate to recharge it almost instantly. It's like having a portable power bank on you at all times. You don't have to find a plug or wait till you get home. You just swap in more energy immediately. But that power bank only holds so much. You only have so much phosphocreatine stored. And once it's depleted, after about 6 to 30 seconds of intense effort, you're relying on slower energy systems. This is why creatine supplementation works. When you take extra creatine, you expand the size of that power bank. More phosphocreatine stored in your muscles means more rapid energy recycling, which means you can sustain high intensity effort a little longer before fatigue kicks in. An extra rep, a fast recovery between sprints, a slightly heavier set. That's the core mechanism, and it has been verified across hundreds of studies. Now, the same energy system exists in your brain. Your brain also has creatine kinase, that enzyme that manages this whole phosphocreatine process, which is why people started asking, if creatine helps muscles produce more energy, could it help the brain too? We'll get to that, but I want you to hold on to this mechanism because this is the key to understanding every claim we're about to evaluate. Every time someone tells you creatine does something, the question is, does that thing depend on ATP availability? And does supplementation actually increase creatine levels in the relevant tissue? For muscles, the answer is clearly yes. Supplementation increases intramuscular creatine by 20 to 40%. For the brain, that's where things get complicated. And again, we'll get there. One more thing before we move on. A question I see constantly. If I take creatine, will my body stop making its own? The short answer is temporarily yes. When you flood the system with exogenous creatine, your kidneys and liver pump the brakes on the production. That's normal negative feedback. Why make more if it's coming from the outside? But when you stop supplementing, your body resumes its own creatine production. The International Society of Sports Nutrition, or the ISSN for short, basically one of the leading authorities in supplement research, reviewed the evidence and concluded no evidence has suggested that muscle creatine levels fall below baseline after cessation. The commonly cited recovery timeline is 4 to 6 weeks, and the mechanism backs that up. Creatine acts as its own off switch. It suppresses the enzyme that produces it through negative feedback. Remove the external creatine, the feedback lifts, the enzyme resumes. That's how the biochemistry works. It's self-correcting by design. What we don't have is a study that tracked someone who supplemented and then measured how long the recovery took. The 4 to 6 weeks figure comes from studies that lasted weeks to months. That kind of long-term cessation research is rare across all of nutrition science, not just creatine. These studies are expensive, hard to retain participants for, and nobody's funding them. So the honest framing is the ISSN's conclusion is well reasoned, the mechanism is well defined, and no one has ever reported a problem. But the precise timeline after years of continuous use hasn't been directly measured. You're not creating a dependency, but I'd rather give you the full picture and not round off the edges. Now, the thing creatine is most famous for: muscle strength and body composition. Let's start with the evidence that's rock solid. Creatine supplementation combined with resistance training increases muscle strength and lean body mass. Full stop. This is not a maybe. This is one of the most replicated findings in sports nutrition. A meta-analysis of 23 randomized controlled trials, 469 participants, found the creatine group could lift on average 4.43 kilograms more on the upper body exercises compared to placebo. Lower body, even more, 11.35 kilograms more, both statistically significant. And lean muscle mass across 683 participants increased by about 1.08 kilograms on average over 8 to 12 weeks compared to resistance training alone. But before we carry on any further, let's make a quick pit stop. Will it make me bulky? This is the number one concern I hear from most women, and the answer is no, absolutely not. We just said the average extra muscle gain from creatine, on top of what you'd build from training alone, is about 1 kilogram over 8 to 12 weeks. That shows up as definition, not bulk. Slightly more visible muscle tone, slightly better recovery between sets, the ability to push a little harder in your training. If you're doing light to moderate resistance training, the effect is even smaller. And if you're taking creatine purely for cognitive benefits without any training, the muscle effect is minimal. You're not going to accidentally look like a bodybuilder. That takes years of deliberate effort, caloric surplus, and, let's be honest, substances that are not creatine. A meta-analysis looking specifically at outcomes in women, 951 female participants across 29 studies, found no significant difference in body weight between creatine group and placebo. So, women appear to gain less water weight than men from taking creatine. And the reason is straightforward. It's not hormonal. It's purely mechanical. Creatine is osmotically active. What that means is it pulls water into the muscle cells. The total amount of water you retain scales directly with the total amount of creatine your muscles store. Women have less total muscle mass than men, which means a smaller creatine storage pool, which means less total osmotic draw. You're filling a smaller tank. Women and men increase creatine concentration by the same percentage, but women accumulate less total body water because they have less muscle mass to store it in. Which brings us, ladies, to the question I hear asked a lot of the times. But will it make me bloat? Let's be specific about what creatine actually does to your water. Yes, creatine increases total body water. That's well established across dozens of studies. The question is, where does that water go? Because only if it's sitting under your skin, you'll look puffy. But if it's inside your muscles, you won't. The evidence points mostly towards muscle cells. Creatine is osmotically active, so it pulls water into the cells where it's stored. Multiple studies have tracked where creatine water actually ends up, using bioimpedance, MRI, and other experimental techniques. The consistent finding is water mostly accumulates inside muscle cells. Extracellular water, the kind that causes visible puffiness, doesn't significantly change. Not every study agrees on the perfect split between the extracellular and the intracellular, but the direction is very clear. One more thing on this. A narrative review found that creatine-related water retention does not significantly differ across menstrual cycle phases. The bloating you might get in your luteal phase, that's extracellular water driven by hormones. Creatine water is intracellular. Different compartment, different mechanism. In fact, some researchers have suggested that taking creatine may actually counteract the bloating that you might get during that luteal phase that we've just talked about by promoting shifts from the extracellular space into the intracellular space, so within your muscle stores. That's speculative, but the mechanisms are plausible. The intracellular water stays there as long as you supplement. It's not a side effect, it's just how creatine does the job. If you stop creatine, your muscles release the water and your water level drops back to baseline. But the temporary feeling that some people describe when just starting out to take creatine, so in the first week or two or so, it's just your body adjusting to the new balance in the system. That scale change is muscle hydration. It's not fat. And it's not the subcutaneous bloat, i.e. the puffiness in your face. Your muscles are literally holding more water because that's the mechanism that creatine works by. Now, I want to be real about this. If you're someone who's quite focused on the scale, that first week or two can mess with your head. Measure your body composition by how your clothes fit and not by that number on the scale during the first couple of weeks. If you're emotionally attached to the scale, creatine will test that relationship. Here is something the meta-analyses make really clear. The magnitude of creatine's benefit depends on your training status. People new to resistance training show the biggest effects, significantly more than those who've been training for years. What about athletes, you'll ask? Still significant, but much smaller effect. Diminishing returns. If you're already close to your physiological ceiling for intramuscular creatine, supplementation gives you less headroom. And there's another factor. How you train matters. Creatine fuels short, powerful efforts, roughly the first 10 to 30 seconds of maximum exertion. So anything that taxes that system hard benefits most. Heavy lifting, sprints, repeated high-intensity exercises, intervals, the final kick at the end of the race. Studies where participants lifted above 75% of their max showed significantly greater strength gains with creatine than studies using lighter loads. Same principle applies outside the gym. A meta-analysis of 14 randomized controlled trials found creatine improved mean power output during repeated sprints. Not peak power during a single sprint. That's an important distinction. Creatine doesn't make you more explosive on the first effort. It helps you maintain power across multiple efforts. Your second, third, fourth sprint stays closer to your best. A circuit class with repeated bursts of effort. A sprint finish in cycling. A football player doing repeated sprints. If the effort is short and explosive, creatine has something to offer. That's the phosphocreatine system at work, sustaining the energy recycling during those short bursts of maximal effort. With a long, steady-state run or a moderate-pace bike ride, the phosphocreatine system barely gets involved because it's depleted roughly within those 10 to 30 seconds of that maximum effort. After that, your body switches to oxidative metabolism, using oxygen to burn glycogen and fat, which is slower but essentially unlimited in duration. Okay, this is the section that matters most for the viral conversation, because brain health is a big part of why creatine went from the gym product to a wellness product. And it's the reason 20 to 30-year-olds, not bodybuilders, are now the fastest growing creatine consumer group. So let's be really precise about what the evidence actually says. A meta-analysis of 16 randomized controlled trials, 492 participants, found creatine supplementation produced significant improvements in memory function. It showed up across multiple memory tests: word recall, working memory tasks, short-term retention. Processing speed also improved. Reaction times got faster, meaning faster response, although the certainty of evidence was graded moderate. So yes, there is genuine evidence that creatine supplementation can improve memory function and processing speeds in healthy adults. And the largest randomized control trial to this date backs this up. 123 healthy adults, 57% female, average age around 31, received either 5 grams daily for 6 weeks or placebo. The result? A small improvement in working memory that bordered statistical significance, and no effect on abstract reasoning or other cognitive measurements that they have tested. The researchers estimated the working memory gain as roughly 2.5 IQ points. Small, but not nothing. And critically, no sex differences. Women and men responded the same. Think about it for a second, because I want to be clear about what modestly means there. First, the benefit is specific. Memory and processing speed, yes. Overall cognitive function and executive function, no significant difference. So it's a no for general brain power. You're not going to become limitless, essentially. You're going to be a bit better at remembering things and slightly faster at processing information. Second, your muscles will happily soak up the creatine, but your brain is picky. Multiple studies using magnetic resonance spectroscopy found that standard daily dosing increases brain phosphocreatine by only 5 to 10%, about half the increase seen in muscle. And many studies found no detectable increase at all. The culprit here is the blood-brain barrier. It limits how much circulating creatine can actually enter the brain. Unlike muscles, which absorb creatine freely from the bloodstream, the brain maintains its own supply through local synthesis. It has its own creatine production line and it guards the door. Now, here is where it gets genuinely really interesting, because a 2024 study just challenged that in a very specific way. In that trial, Gorgi, Nejad, and colleagues ran a double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover trial. 15 healthy young adults, 8 women, 7 men, ages 20 to 28, were kept awake for 21 hours in a controlled lab setting. At 8:30 p.m., they received either a single high dose of creatine, 0.35 grams per kilogram of body weight, so about 25 grams for a 70-kilo person, or placebo. Then the researchers tracked what happened to their brains in real time using phosphorus and MRS imaging at 3.5 hours, 5.5 hours, and 7.5 hours after the dose. And the results were not subtle. The creatine group showed measurable increases in brain creatine and phosphocreatine detected directly via brain imaging. The blood-brain barrier actually let it through, and the cognitive effect matched. Processing speed improved by 29% on language tasks, 24% on numeric tasks, 16% on logic tasks. Word memory improved by about 10%. Subjective fatigue was significantly reduced. A single dose in hours, not weeks. Measurable brain uptake confirmed by neuroimaging. But, and this is where I need you to hold two things in your head at once, the conditions matter enormously. This wasn't someone taking 5 grams with their morning smoothie on a normal Thursday. This was 5 times the standard dose given to an exhausted brain running low on energy from sleep deprivation. The researchers' hypothesis is that when the brain is metabolically stressed, it temporarily upregulates creatine transporter activity at the blood-brain barrier. The stressed brain opens the door wider, and a massive dose exploits that window. There's also a crucial point for the girls here. The study did include 8 women, but it didn't report sex-stratified results. So we don't know if women responded the same, better, or worse than men. So the picture is more nuanced than creatine can't get into your brain. It's more like at standard doses in a rested brain, the blood-brain barrier barely lets supplemental creatine through. Under stress, sleep deprivation, cognitive overload, the brain can temporarily increase its uptake, and a high dose can make a real difference. One more data point that supports this. A 2025 randomized control trial in perimenopausal and menopausal women found that even a low dose, 1.5 grams of creatine hydrochloride daily for 8 weeks, increased frontal brain creatine levels by 17% and improved reaction time by about 7%. That's a different population, a different form, and a much lower dose. But it adds to the evidence that creatine can reach the brain under right conditions. Here's the honest framing. If someone claims 5 grams a day is directly powering your neurons the way it powers your muscles, that's still an oversimplification at standard doses. But the emerging research on high-dose acute use and brain-specific protocols is genuinely exciting. This area is moving fast. Next, the timeline problem. Brain fog gone in 24 hours did cause some chaos on TikTok. This one got more complicated thanks to the Gorgi Nejad trial we just discussed, because technically they saw cognitive improvements within hours of a single dose. So is the weeks, not hours framing wrong? Not quite. Here's the distinction. At standard doses, 3 to 5 grams per day, in a rested brain, creatine barely gets through. That's why 16 published studies say expect 2 to 4 weeks of daily continuous dosing before noticeable cognitive effects. You're slowly building up a creatine pool. The biological timeline for creatine to reach saturation in your muscles at 5 grams daily is about 28 days. The Gorgi-Naijan trial used a dose 5 times higher than that, 25 grams in one hit, and the participants were sleep deprived, which appears to be the critical factor for acute brain uptake. Those are not the conditions of someone taking a daily scoop of creatine before work and expecting clarity by lunchtime. At normal doses, expect weeks. Under high dose, high stress conditions, because life doesn't always cooperate with your schedule, the brain may respond faster. Different situations, different biology. That's the science, but that's not the version most people are hearing. And I want to address this directly because this is the elephant in the supplement aisle. Compare that with what's actually being sold to you online. Creatine cleared my brain fog in a week. This is the supplement every woman needs for mental clarity. I can't believe no one told me about this sooner. You see the gap, right? And here's the part that should make you pause. A lot of people pushing creatine hardest for brain health are also selling it or are sponsored by someone who does. Which doesn't mean creatine is useless for the brain. We just walked through the evidence, it's not. But the next time someone tells you creatine changed their life, ask yourself one thing. Are they citing a study or a discount code? Not everyone responds the same way. 2 patterns stand out. Age matters. Adults under 60 showed meaningful improvements in attention tasks. Adults over 60, no significant effect, which is disappointing if you were hoping creatine would be a fix for age-related cognitive decline. Diet might matter. Vegetarians and vegans have roughly a third to a half less creatine floating around in their body than meat eaters, because creatine comes primarily from animal foods. There is some evidence that vegetarians see a bigger cognitive boost on supplementation, but a larger follow-up study didn't confirm it. So the vegetarian advantage might have been real, or it might have been a false positive. We don't know yet. And as we covered in detail, sleep deprivation is where the cognitive benefit is strongest. If your brain is running low on energy, creatine has more to offer. Now, let's talk about creatine in the context of women's health and the emerging science. After all, creatine for women has 7.9 billion views on TikTok. But this is also where a tub of white powder somehow ends up with a wait list, a pastel rebrand, and better reviews than your last situationship. Women respond to creatine. The strength benefits, the lean mass gains, the energy recycling, all of it. But here's what's interesting about the starting point. Because women synthesize about 20% less creatine than men and consume 30 to 40% less from their diet on average, women are likely to start from a lower baseline, more room for improvement, potentially a stronger relative response to supplementation, and the safety data is clear. A meta-analysis of 951 women across 29 studies found no serious adverse outcomes. GI symptoms, kidney markers, body weight, which we will come back to shortly, are no different from placebo group. So here's something most people don't know. Creatine might actually help during the worst part of the menstrual cycle. Quick orientation if you need it. The menstrual cycle has 4 phases. Menstruation, the follicular phase, ovulation, and then the luteal phase. The luteal phase is the one that matters here. It's the stretch after ovulation, roughly days 15 to days 28, when progesterone is high, energy dips, and fatigue often spikes. The part of the month where a lot of women feel like they're running on an almost empty tank. An RCT, a randomized controlled clinical trial of 39 active women, tested whether creatine could do anything about that. But before I tell you the results, another quick pit stop, because at this point I need to tell you about loading. Here's the principle. Some supplements work by accumulating in your tissues over time until they reach a functional ceiling, a saturation point. Once you're there, your cells have as much of the substance that they can store, and and that's when the benefits kick in. Creatine is one of those supplements. At 5 grams a day, it takes about 28 days to saturate your muscles. Now, if you want to get there faster, you can do loading, or what's also sometimes called front loading. That means taking a higher dose over a short window, saturating faster, and then dropping back down to the maintenance dose. This isn't unique to creatine. Beta-alanine, sodium bicarbonate, glycerol, several supplements follow the same logic. High dose briefly, reach the target, maintain it. For creatine specifically, the loading protocol is 20 grams a day for 5 to 7 days, split into 4 5-gram doses, which gets your muscles to the same saturation point in about a week instead of a month. Same destination, faster route. And as we'll get into later, it does have some trade-offs. Back to the study. The women loaded creatine during luteal phase specifically, and the result? The creatine group saw a 5.8% reduction in their fatigue index. The placebo group, 0.1%, statistically significant. And here's where it gets even more interesting. During the luteal phase, many women tend to retain fluid in the wrong places. Under the skin, in the face, the kind of water load that makes you feel heavy and swollen. That's driven by hormonal shifts pushing fluid into the extracellular space. Creatine's osmotic effect works in the opposite direction. It pulls water into muscle cells. So theoretically, creatine supplementation during the luteal phase might partially counteract the bloating many women feel during this phase by shifting fluid from extracellular to intracellular space. That's still speculative, small study. The mechanism is plausible and the data is intriguing, but it needs a larger trial before we can say anything definitive. What we can say with confidence is that creatine does not disrupt your menstrual cycle. It does not delay your period. It does not cause hormonal imbalance. That's been directly studied. The evidence is clear. Now, if the luteal phase data caught your attention, this next part is going to sound even more compelling, because there is a claim circulating in the women's wellness space, especially among women 30 and older, that creatine can help with menopause brain fog. During perimenopause and menopause, estrogen fluctuates and then eventually declines, and estrogen plays a role in creatine kinase activity, that enzyme that manages the phosphocreatine system. When estrogen drops, creatine kinase activity drops, which means your brain's energy recycling system becomes less efficient at exactly the time when many women report cognitive symptoms: brain fog, memory issues, difficulty concentrating. The hypothesis is exogenous creatine, so creatine from supplements, might partially compensate for this reduced enzymatic activity. And there are small randomized controlled trials now actually testing this. One study found that creatine combined with resistance training improved sleep duration and cognitive function in peri- and post-menopausal women. 1/3 of post-menopausal women in the study shifted from mild cognitive impairment back to the normal range. Now that's a compelling finding, but it's not quite been replicated at scale yet. The evidence base for creatine in menopause is where the collagen for skin evidence was a few years ago. Promising, mechanistically plausible, but not yet strong enough to make definitive claims. Okay, let's talk pregnancy and breastfeeding. I know some of you are going to ask, so here is what we know. We don't have enough human data. Animal studies are encouraging. They suggest maternal creatine supplementation might protect neonatal brain tissue during birth complications, but no complete human-controlled trial exists for pregnant women as of now. There is some population-level data. A large US National Health Survey tracked the diets and health outcomes of over 4,500 women between 2017 and 2020. Women who consumed adequate dietary creatine had 25% lower odds of irregular periods and lower risk of several pregnancy complications. But this is observational. It's tracking what women ate, not running a clinical trial. It tells us more about something that's worth investigating rather than implying something about the supplementation itself. Myths, myths, myths. Let's start with the one that just will not die off, the zombie myth: creatine and kidney damage. This traces back to a single case study from 1998. One person, a 25-year-old man who already had kidney disease, glomerulosclerosis, whose kidney function got worse while taking creatine. A French newspaper turned this into "creatine is dangerous for kidneys." European media ran with it, and here we are, 27 years later, still having this conversation. So what does the actual evidence say? A 2025 meta-analysis, the most comprehensive to date, found that yes, serum creatinine does rise slightly when you're taking creatine. And here's what you need to understand. Creatinine is the breakdown product of creatine. When you take more creatine, your body naturally produces more creatinine. That's not damage, that's just chemistry, or rather biology. But creatinine is also what doctors use to estimate kidney function, because normally, if creatinine goes up, it means your kidneys aren't filtering properly. So when a blood test shows elevated creatinine in a creatine user, it looks like kidney trouble. Well, it's not. It's just more creatinine being produced and not less cleared out. And we know that because there's a better test. Glomerular filtration rate measures how well your kidneys are actually filtering. It's the direct answer. And across multiple randomized controlled trials, kidneys working perfectly fine. Studies lasting up to 5 years. The ISSN, the International Society of Sports Nutrition, confirms safety at doses up to 30 grams a day. So why does this myth keep circulating? Because of how standard blood tests work. Your doctor orders a panel. They see elevated creatinine. They don't know you're taking creatine, and they flag it as a potential kidney problem. This actually happens. People get told to stop taking creatine by their doctor based on a slightly elevated number that's completely expected and still within normal range. The doctor isn't wrong for being cautious. They just don't have the context. So if you're taking creatine and you're getting blood work done, tell your doctor beforehand. Most standard panels already include an estimated kidney filtration rate, but the problem is that estimate is calculated from your creatinine levels. So if your creatinine is artificially high because of creatine, the estimate makes your kidneys look worse than they are. Your doctor needs to know that context. Urine protein, for example, is a straightforward check that shows your kidneys are working properly. And if there's any real concern beyond that, they can order a cystatin C-based test, which isn't affected by creatine at all. Caveat: if you already have kidney disease, don't start creatine without running it past your doctor first. The safety data we just talked about, that's all from people with healthy kidneys. The next one, I understand the anxiety around. Hair loss. It's visible, it's personal, it's scary. So let's look at where this fear comes from. One study, 2009, 20 college-aged male rugby players. 3 weeks. They found a 56% increase in DHT, dihydrotestosterone, after a loading phase. DHT is linked to male pattern baldness. The internet connected the dots, and the fear persisted for 16 years. But here's what that study did not do: measure actual hair loss. No one looked at anyone's hair. They measured the hormone in the blood. That's it. Fast forward to 2025, a proper randomized controlled trial, 38 participants, 12 weeks, double blind, actually measured hair directly. Dermoscopic imaging, trichogram testing, hair density, follicle count, thickness, growth phase. The result? No difference between creatine and placebo group on any hair metric. None. And DHT levels? Also no change. So the one study that started all of this, never replicated in 16 years, now has a direct contradiction from a methodologically superior trial that actually bothered to look at someone's head. One limitation worth noting, the 2025 trial excluded people with diagnosed hair loss or strong family history. So if you're already genetically predisposed to aggressive hair loss, current evidence can't give you a guarantee. But the evidence that creatine causes it, you've just heard all of it. That's how thin it is. Now, for women listening, the entire hair loss conversation is built on male data. No published study on hair loss and creatine in women exists. Zero. The 2025 study that actually measured hair explicitly excluded women. And the biology is actually really quite different. Women's hair follicles produce 3 to 3.5 times less of the enzyme that converts testosterone into DHT, the hormone linked to male pattern baldness. On top of that, women's hair follicles have 6 times more of a different enzyme, aromatase, that converts testosterone to estrogen instead. So women's hair follicles are essentially wired to shunt testosterone away from DHT and towards something protective. Let's put this topic to rest completely. Over 60% of women with female pattern hair loss have completely normal androgen levels. Their hair loss isn't being driven by DHT at all. It's genetics, inflammation, hormonal shifts, a different set of drivers. So even if creatine did raise DHT levels in women, which nobody has shown, the route from there to hair loss is much weaker in female biology. This one's not worth losing sleep over. Or hair. Moon face. Creatine face. This is another big one for women. We've covered the water data earlier. We've said that water retention from creatine goes primarily into muscle cells, but there was a nuance I promised I'd revisit. I want to be honest. During your loading phase, 20 grams a day for a week, some people do experience temporary puffiness. That's a lot of water moving around your body in a short window. It settles once you move to maintenance dose. At 3 to 5 grams daily with no loading, there's no evidence of creatine puffy face beyond what you'd see with normal water fluctuation from salt intake, sleep quality, and menstrual cycle changes. Loading is where people feel weird. So if you're concerned, skip the loading phase. Start at 5 grams. You'll reach the same saturation level in 28 days, with essentially no visible water changes along the way. However, there still remains another caveat. For now, onwards, you need to cycle creatine. 2 myths, 1 misunderstanding. Let's do them together. First, cycling. In supplement world, cycling means taking something for a set period of time, then deliberately stopping for a few weeks, and then starting again. On, off, on, off. Some supplement labels actually recommend this. The idea is your body needs a reset or it will stop responding. That's not how creatine works. As we've covered, creatine builds up in your muscles over time until it reaches saturation. If you stop taking it, your levels drop. About 1.7% of your stored creatine per day. You're not giving your body a strategic rest. You're just draining what you built up and starting over. There is no evidence that muscle creatine levels fall below your natural baseline after you stop supplementing, and the benefits don't fade from tolerance. If your results plateau over months, that's because you've hit your physiological ceiling, not because creatine stopped working. Part of the reason this misconception sticks around, some supplement labels actually recommend cycling, which conveniently means you run through your tub faster and buy again sooner. Second, dependency. We covered this earlier. Your body dials down its own creatine production while you supplement and ramps it back up within 4 to 6 weeks after you stop. Nothing is permanently suppressed. You're not creating a dependency. Okay, you've heard the science. Now let's talk about what you actually put in your basket, because this is where a lot of people waste a lot of money. Creatine comes in different forms. You'll see creatine monohydrate, creatine hydrochloride, buffered creatine, creatine ethyl ester, magnesium chelate, citrate, pyruvate. The list keeps going. Each one marketed as more advanced or better absorbed than the last. Here's what over 1,000 clinical trials say. Creatine monohydrate is the only form with robust evidence behind it. Every major clinical trial used it. It's 99% absorbed. The International Society of Sports Nutrition calls it the most extensively studied and clinically effective form of creatine. But what about creatine hydrochloride? You'll see it marketed as more soluble and easier on the stomach. Better solubility? Yes, it does dissolve faster in water. But when directly compared to monohydrate, no performance advantage. None. The isocene literally calls premium alternative forms baloney. And remember, every gram of hydrochloride gives you less actual creatine at a higher price with zero evidence it works better. So, buy creatine monohydrate powder. That's the one. Why powder and not gummies? And it needs to be powder. Here's why. Remember the creatine gummy from the top of the episode? The one that contained 2% of the advertised dose? That wasn't a one-off. When Eurofins, a major independent lab, tested multiple creatine brands in 2025, 46% failed their label claims. The reason comes down to chemistry. Creatine monohydrate as a dry powder is remarkably stable. No degradation detected after 3 years at 40 degrees. Even at 60 degrees, it barely breaks down over years. But that's dry powder. The moment creatine is dissolved in liquid, the rules change. Degradation accelerates with heat, acidity, and time. And gummy manufacturing dissolves creatine into a hot, wet mixture at 80 to 100 degrees Celsius, then leaves it in a high moisture environment for hours during cooling and curing. No one has published a study on exactly how much creatine survives that process, but we don't need to guess, because independent lab testing already told us the answer. 46% of gummy brands failed their label claims. The chemistry likely explains why. During production, creatine converts into creatinine, which your body just flushes out. The finished gummy looks right, tastes right, and does almost nothing. So unless a gummy brand has passed independent third-party testing at the full dose, you're buying something that looks like a supplement, tastes like a supplement, but actually isn't one. And I get it. Mixing creatine powder into water is not exactly a fun tasting experience. So let me quickly cover what you can and can't mix it with, because this does make a difference. The key thing to understand, creatine breaks down faster in liquid than as a dry powder, and the two biggest accelerators are heat and acidity. But the reaction is slow, meaning how long it sits in the liquid matters more than the liquid itself. Coffee. If you stir creatine into hot coffee and drink it within 10 to 15 minutes, the loss is estimated at well under 5%. Your mug is cooling while you drink, that's fine, but if you mix it and leave it on the counter for an hour, you'll lose more, especially since coffee is mildly acidic and acidity speeds up the breakdown. Orange juice, pH of about 3.5, fairly acidic, left for 3 days at room temperature, you'd lose about 21% of your creatine, but mixed and drunk within 10 minutes, less than 1% loss. The degradation needs time to happen. And here's the properly strange part. Stomach acid, which is far more acidic than orange juice, actually protects creatine at very low pH. The chemical structure of creatine gets locked in a way that prevents it from breaking down. So your stomach is actually safer for creatine than a glass of juice left on the counter. Less than 1% converts to creatinine during digestion. The golden rule, mix and drink promptly. Don't pre-mix and forget about it. One quick chemistry note on what the solubility math looks like. Creatine monohydrate's reported solubility in water at room temperature is roughly 18 grams per litre. That means a 5-gram dose only fully dissolves once you're in the ballpark of a large glass of water. If you're mixing it into a tiny shot of liquid, a lot of it will stay as a gritty suspension, and that's one reason big concentrated doses tend to upset people's stomachs. Separate question from the heat issue I've received: does caffeine cancel out creatine? The short answer is no. This myth comes from a single study in the 90s. 9 participants, massive caffeine doses, about 4 cups of strong coffee all at once. At that extreme dose, the performance benefit of creatine disappeared. But even in that study, muscle creatine uptake was completely normal. The creatine still got into the muscles. It just didn't translate into performance at a dose of caffeine most people wouldn't consume. Modern reviews looking across multiple studies say at normal caffeine intake, there is no consistent evidence of interference. A 2021 study with 32 participants using realistic caffeine doses found similar muscle gains whether caffeine was added or not. The reason is simple. Caffeine and creatine work through completely different mechanisms. They don't compete. Your morning coffee and your creatine are fine together. Just don't let it sit there long enough to become iced coffee. Now, the other question everyone asks, does it matter which type of creatine you buy? Again, as we've covered above, a systematic review of 17 randomized controlled trials looked at alternative forms. Citrate, ethyl ester, malate, nitrate, pyruvate, magnesium chelate, and found no consistent evidence that outperform monohydrate. Buy plain creatine monohydrate powder. Save your money. Speaking of money, what does it actually cost? A standard 500 gram creatine monohydrate tub costs about £8 to £20 in the UK or $15 to $30 in the US. At 5 grams a day, that's over 3 months worth of supply. A basic creatine monohydrate powder from any reputable brand with third-party testing is all you need. Don't let marketing convince you otherwise. I've seen comments from women who've gained 3 to 5 pounds during the first week or two and have described it as terrifying. One woman stopped creatine before her wedding photos were taken specifically to avoid the look. Practical protocol time. Here's your action plan. Form, creatine monohydrate. End of discussion. Dose. Okay, monohydrate, that part's simple. The dose question is where it gets more personal because the research now points to different amounts depending on what you're actually after. 3 tiers, different goals, different doses. Tier 1, 5 grams per day. This is the standard, the ISSN recommendation, the dose behind the vast majority of creatine research. At 5 grams daily, your muscles are saturated in about 28 days. You'll get the strength benefits, the lean mass benefits, and some modest cognitive improvement over time. Some studies use 3 grams, and that works too. It just takes a bit longer to saturate. If you're taking creatine for training, you just need 5 grams. Don't overthink it. Tier 2, 10 grams per day. This is the emerging position for people who want whole body coverage, muscle and brain. We covered the brain imaging evidence earlier. Higher doses show a meaningfully stronger response in brain energy levels, and 10 grams is where the research starts to look different from 5 grams. Darren Kando, creatine researcher with over 70 published papers on the topic, takes 10 grams daily himself. And if you've seen anyone online recently recommending 10 grams, there's a good chance it traces back to Rhonda Patrick. She's a biomedical scientist who, after interviewing Kando about this research, switched from 5 to 10 grams daily in 2025. That's largely why the 10-gram conversation has gone mainstream. The ISSN recommendation is still 3 to 5 grams, so Kando and Patrick are ahead of the consensus here. If you want to follow their lead, the safety data supports it. Up to 30 grams per day for up to 5 years without adverse effects. If you'd rather stick with 5 and wait for stronger evidence, that's a perfectly reasonable call too. Tier 3, 20 to 25 grams, a single dose, not daily. This is the emergency tool. Exam tomorrow and you barely slept? Long haul jet lag and you need to be sharp in 3 hours? This is the Gorgie Najad protocol we have covered. A single high dose taken about 3 hours before you need the cognitive boost, with effects lasting through 3 to 7.5 hour window. The study dosed by body weight, about 0.35 grams per kilo. So if you're 60 kilos, that's about 21 grams. You can do the maths here. one dose as needed, then back to baseline dose. This is not a daily strategy. It's a context-specific protocol tested at the sleep deprivation conditions. And also at this dose, your stomach will probably let you know about it. Splitting it into 4 or 5 microdoses over a couple of hours is a reasonable workaround, though no study has directly compared single versus split dosing for cognitive outcomes. Loading, we talked about this earlier. 20 grams for 3 to 7 days gets you to the same muscle saturation as 5 grams daily for 28 days, just faster. A 2025 women-specific trial found that 81% of women reported at least one GI symptom during use, with higher rates in the loading group. For most people, skipping the loading phase and starting at 5 grams daily is a smarter play. How to take it? We've covered the drinks. What about food? Some carbs may help. A banana, some rice, a meal. One study found that taking creatine with carbs improved how much your body actually retains, from 61% to 80%. Timing around your workout doesn't matter. 6 trials confirmed no difference between taking it before versus after. Just be consistent every day, rest days included. Let's talk stomach issues, because if there's one thing that puts people off creatine, it is this. First, zoom out. At standard maintenance doses, GI effects are uncommon overall. A large analysis of hundreds of randomized trials found GI complaints weren't statistically higher on creatine as opposed to placebo. Where problems show up is dosing style, especially big single doses. There's a clean example of this in a controlled clinical trial in athletes. A single 10-gram dose caused diarrhea in 55.6% of users, but splitting the same total dose into 2 5-gram doses cut that to 28.6%. Roughly half. The most likely explanation is simple physics. Creatine monohydrate doesn't dissolve brilliantly, and your gut can only absorb so much at once. A large bolus can leave more unabsorbed material sitting in the intestine, pulling water into the gut by osmosis. The same basic mechanism behind osmotic laxatives. That mechanism hasn't been directly measured in humans for creatine, but it fits the dose response pattern we see. If you're taking 5 grams a day, 1 dose is usually fine. If you're doing 10 grams a day, do 5 and 5, usually separated by a few hours. The same principle applies if you're doing 20 grams and more. If you are loading, spread it out as smaller servings. If you just want it to dissolve faster, warmer water may help. Basic kinetics. Higher temperature increases molecular motion and speeds dissolution. And stability data show creatine doesn't convert to creatinine over the few minutes it takes to mix and drink it. Breakdown is an hours to days problem. The simplest thing to try first is reducing the peak concentration. That can mean taking it with a large glass of water, with a meal, or splitting the dose. A meal slows gastric emptying and may reduce the peak concentration of creatine reaching the intestine. That hasn't been directly tested in trials for stomach comfort with creatine, but again, physiologically, it's a reasonable approach. If your gut is sensitive, avoid taking a large concentrated dose on an empty stomach. The stronger intervention, and the one with actual trial data, is splitting the dose. A trial of 59 athletes found that taking 10-gram servings as 2 5-gram servings cut diarrhea rates nearly in half, from 56% to 29%. Lower peak concentration in the intestine likely explains that drop. If you're using higher doses, divide them. Half in the morning, half later in the day. You can also build up gradually rather than jumping straight to a larger intake. If symptoms persist despite adjusting dose and timing, it's reasonable to step away. Not everyone tolerates every supplement. treatment. That said, this is rare at normal doses. The vast majority of people tolerate 5 grams a day without issues, and the benefits are worth trying to get there. However, if you're on any medication, now is the time to pay attention. A lot of people nowadays, especially in their 20s, are on SSRIs, birth control, ADHD pills, and painkillers. And the question is always the same. Is creatine safe to combine with what I'm already taking? SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the most commonly prescribed class of antidepressants. That's medications like sertraline, fluoxetine, escitalopram, or previously citalopram. This is where the news is actually good. Not only is there no known interaction, there's evidence that your antidepressant might work better with creatine. A randomized double-blind controlled trial of 52 women with major depressive disorder found that women taking creatine alongside their SSRI, which in this study was escitalopram, achieved remission at twice the rate, 52% versus 26%, and improved 2 weeks faster than placebo. No additional side effects. Instead, creatine fueled the brain's energy system independently, potentially accelerating your brain's ability to respond to serotonergic treatment. This has been replicated in multiple smaller trials. One found 50% reduction in depression scores. Another found 60% improvement in treatment-resistant patients when creatine was added. The thing to flag here, though, in an early trial, 2 patients with bipolar depression developed mania after adding creatine. If you have bipolar disorder, this combination carries real risk and needs close psychiatric supervision. Of course, that applies more broadly. If you have any diagnosed mental health condition and you are on medication for it, don't add creatine without talking to whoever manages your treatment first. But for unipolar depression on SSRIs, the evidence is genuinely promising. Hormonal birth control, the pill, IUD, whatever you're on. I know this is the first thing you're going to Google. No study has looked at this, but creatine has nothing to do with your hormones. It works through energy metabolism. Different system, different planet. You're fine. ADHD medications, same story. Nobody has studied this combination directly, but they work through completely different systems. No reason to expect a problem. NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, the likes of ibuprofen, naproxen, not paracetamol, that's a different mechanism. If you take one for a headache or period cramps every now and then, no issue at all. But if you're on them daily for chronic pain or anything long-term, your doctor is probably already monitoring kidney function. Both NSAIDs and creatine put some load on your kidneys through different routes. No study has shown actual harm from combining them, but make sure whoever is managing your care knows you're taking creatine. They need the full picture. The kidney load matters especially if you're on blood thinners, like warfarin, where your blood is being monitored regularly. Now, for the stuff you actually want to know day to day. Missed a day, don't worry about it. Creatine works through saturation. It builds up in your muscles over time. One day off barely dents your stores. Don't double up, just take your normal dose and move on. Missed a week, still fine. You're still well above your natural baseline. Pick back up at your usual dose. No need to reload. Stopped completely, your stores gradually return to baseline over 4 to 6 weeks. It's a slow decline, not a cliff. Flying with creatine. It's a white powder. I know. Keep it in the original labeled container and you won't have any issues at security. If you transfer it to a small container for travel, make it transparent and label it clearly. Be an adult about your white powder. Do not, I repeat, do not put unlabeled white powder in a random Ziploc bag in your carry-on. You're asking for a conversation that you don't want to have. Storage. Dry creatine powder is borderline indestructible. As I mentioned, no degradation detectable after 3 years at 40 degrees in sealed containers. Keep it in a cupboard with the lid closed. The only thing that breaks it down is moisture. So Don't store it in your bathroom. Almost everyone can take creatine safely, but there are some exceptions, which we've touched on previously. And if any of these apply to you, you know what to do. Go talk to your doctor. Impaired kidney function. Creatine increases the workload on your kidneys. Healthy kidneys handle this without any issues, but compromised kidneys may not. Same goes for if you're on blood pressure medication or on diabetes medication. Creatine is safe alongside them, but let your doctor know so they can read your blood work in context. IBS. No clinical data exists for IBS and creatine in particular. If you want to try it, start at 1 gram a day, build up slowly, skip loading entirely, and track your symptoms carefully. Your gut is already sensitive, so go gently and give yourself permission to stop if it makes things worse. Everyone else, the safety profile is about as strong as it gets for any supplement. No serious drug interactions in any major database. Both the European Medicines Agency and the FDA have cleared it without warnings. Hundreds of studies, decades of use, and the worst accusation anyone's been able to make against creatine is that it adds water weight. Creatine's lawyer would be bored. So here's the bottom line. Creatine has been quietly doing its job since the 90s. Then TikTok discovered it, Kourtney Kardashian has put it in a gummy, and suddenly everyone had an opinion, but the science didn't change. It just got a new outfit. Here's what creatine actually is. Cheap, safe, and effective. It makes you stronger. It helps you build lean mass. It gives your muscles more fuel for the kind of training where every rep counts. And over weeks, it may also sharpen your memory a little bit. For women, there's emerging evidence that it could help during the luteal phase and perimenopause. The early data is encouraging. What creatine is not: a brain drug, a fat burner, or something that needs a celebrity endorsement to work. If you take one thing from this, don't buy the aesthetic. Buy the evidence. Monohydrate, powder, 3 to 5 grams daily, consistency. And if the proof is a link in bio, or it comes as a gummy, you already know what we're doing. We're walking away. Thanks for listening to For Science's Sake. Send this to your friend who still thinks creatine makes your hair fall out, so they know they don't have to book a flight to Turkey. Alright, see you soon.